There are moments in crypto that make headlines. And then there are moments that quietly change the direction of an entire industry. Most people looked at Ripple's latest partnership announcement and saw just another company adding another business client. But that's not what caught my attention. What stood out wasn't the press release itself. It was what this partnership quietly confirms about Ripple's long-term strategy. Because while most investors are watching daily price charts, Ripple keeps doing something very different. They're expanding the financial infrastructure behind the scenes, one institution at a time. And that's exactly why today's update deserves far more attention than it's getting. Let's break down what's really happening. Ripple recently announced a partnership with crypto brokerage Caleb & Brown. On the surface, it may sound like just another business agreement, but when you listen carefully to what was actually discussed, a much bigger picture starts to emerge. According to Caleb & Brown, this partnership wasn't created overnight. They've already been working with Ripple's technology privately for months before making anything public. During that time, Ripple's payment infrastructure helped improve internal operations, especially one area that matters the most to high-value clients, moving money quickly and efficiently. That detail is easy to overlook, but it's incredibly important. When companies continue using a system for months before announcing it publicly, it usually means the technology has already proven itself in real-world conditions. That's very different from announcing a partnership first and figuring everything out later. It also tells us something else. Ripple isn't simply chasing headlines. They're solving actual business problems first. And that's exactly how institutional adoption normally begins. Instead of asking companies to completely change how they operate, Ripple identifies one pain point, improves that process, builds trust over time, and only then starts exploring additional opportunities. That's a much slower approach than most crypto projects take, but historically, it's also the one that lasts. During the interview, Caleb & Brown explained that Ripple wasn't trying to force them into using every product inside Ripple's ecosystem. Instead, the conversation focused on building a solution that actually matched their business needs. Think about that for a second. Many technology companies walk into meetings already convinced their product is the answer to every problem. Ripple appears to be doing the opposite. They begin by understanding the client's biggest operational challenge. Then they build around that. That difference may sound small, but for banks, financial institutions, and enterprise clients, it's everything. Institutions don't adopt technology because it's exciting. They adopt technology because it removes friction, reduces costs, improves efficiency, and integrates smoothly with systems they already use. And that's exactly the approach Ripple has spent years developing. This also explains why many people misunderstand Ripple's progress. Some investors assume every partnership should immediately send billions of dollars onto the XRP ledger. But that's rarely how enterprise adoption works. Large financial companies move step by step. They test, they verify, they measure results. Only after those systems consistently prove themselves do they expand into larger deployments. That's exactly what seems to be happening here. The initial success creates trust. Trust creates additional conversations, and those conversations eventually create larger opportunities. It's a process that doesn't always generate exciting headlines, but it builds something much more valuable, long-term relationships. And if you've followed Ripple over the years, you'll notice this pattern repeating again and again. They're not trying to win a single news cycle. They're trying to become part of the financial infrastructure institutions rely on every single day. That's a much bigger objective. And while this partnership alone won't suddenly transform the crypto market overnight, it may represent another important piece of a much larger puzzle that's quietly coming together behind the scenes. One of the biggest mistakes investors make is assuming institutional adoption happens the same way retail adoption does. Retail investors move with emotion. Institutions move with regulation. That's why every major partnership Ripple announces should be viewed through a completely different lens. For years, one of the biggest questions surrounding digital assets has never been whether the technology works. The technology has existed for a long time. The bigger question has always been whether financial institutions would receive enough regulatory clarity to confidently integrate blockchain into their existing operations. That question is becoming increasingly important. As lawmakers continue discussing digital asset legislation in the United States, many institutions are watching closely, not because they're suddenly discovering blockchain, but because they're waiting for a clearer framework before expanding their involvement. And that's where Ripple appears to have positioned itself differently from much of the crypto industry. Rather than building products first and worrying about regulation later, Ripple has spent years working with regulators, financial institutions, payment providers, and enterprise businesses around the world. Whether people agree with every decision the company has made or not, it's difficult to ignore the consistency of that strategy. They're preparing for a future where digital assets become part of mainstream financial infrastructure, not just speculative investments. That's an important distinction, because when regulations become clearer, institutions won't have time to start building relationships from scratch. They'll naturally look toward companies that already understand compliance, already have enterprise-grade technology, and already have experience working with financial organizations. This is exactly why partnerships like Caleb and Brown deserve attention. The announcement itself isn't the entire story. The real story is that another regulated financial business has chosen to integrate Ripple's technology after testing it in real-world conditions. That builds confidence, and confidence often spreads faster than people realize. Think about how enterprise software grows. One successful implementation leads to another. Satisfied clients become references. Those references create additional conversations. Before long, an entire network begins expanding, not because of marketing, but because businesses see measurable results. That's how many of the world's largest technology companies grew, not through overnight adoption, through consistent execution. Ripple appears to be following a similar path. Meanwhile, another trend continues developing across the broader financial industry. More institutions are openly discussing blockchain infrastructure, tokenization, and faster cross-border settlement solutions than ever before. Just a few years ago, many of these conversations were theoretical. Today, they're becoming practical business discussions. Companies are asking how blockchain fits into their operations rather than whether it belongs there at all. That shift in mindset may ultimately prove more important than any single partnership announcement. But here's another detail that's easy to overlook. Institutional adoption doesn't necessarily happen all at once. It usually unfolds in phases. The company may begin by improving one payment process. Later, it may explore treasury management. Eventually, it may integrate additional blockchain-based services as confidence grows. Every successful phase creates the foundation for the next. That's why experienced investors often pay closer attention to infrastructure than short-term price movements. Price reflects today's sentiment. Infrastructure shapes tomorrow's opportunities. And when you look at Ripple's recent activity through that perspective, a consistent pattern begins to emerge. The company isn't simply announcing partnerships. It's expanding the network required for long-term enterprise adoption. But this leads to an even bigger question. If Ripple continues building this infrastructure while regulatory clarity improves, what could that mean for XRP over the next several years? That's where the final piece of this story becomes especially interesting. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, it's clear that this isn't just about one partnership or one announcement. It's about the strategy Ripple has been following for years, building relationships, expanding infrastructure, and positioning itself where institutional finance is heading rather than where it is today. Of course, no partnership guarantees XRP's future price, and no single headline can predict what the market will do next. There are still regulatory developments to watch, macroeconomic conditions that could influence liquidity, and broader market cycles that will continue affecting digital assets. But one thing is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Ripple isn't slowing down. While much of the crypto market focuses on short-term price action, Ripple continues adding partners, improving its payment network, and strengthening its presence in the institutional space. And if that trend continues alongside greater regulatory clarity, the long-term picture could look very different from what many investors expect today. The key takeaway isn't to follow hype. It's to follow progress. Watch the partnerships, watch the infrastructure, watch the adoption, because those are the developments that often matter long before the price reflects them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think partnerships like this are laying the foundation for XRP's next phase of growth, or do you believe the market is still waiting for a bigger catalyst? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Ojan XRP Insights, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest XRP news, institutional updates, and market analysis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.